Hello and welcome to this session in our Bone Matters series. Today we're talking about body image, how you feel about yourself with osteoporosis, and particularly about how you feel about your loss of height and curvature of the spine that can come with spinal fractures. Now, in other sessions we have discussed feeling fragile and vulnerable to fracture, and also getting the practical help that you need. But today our focus is on the impact on your self-esteem if you have developed what is technically known as a kyphosis. You might hear it described as a dowager's hump. We know for some people this is a distressing experience. We want to think this through and see if we can help you to feel more positive despite or even about these changes. And I'm delighted to welcome Phillippa Diedrichs, who's joined me today. Phillippa is a professor of psychology who works at the University of the West of England in Bristol. Phillippa, perhaps you could introduce yourself and tell us how your research links in with this topic.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me today, Sarah. I think there are lots of interesting intersections between the work that I do as a researcher at the Centre for Appearance Research, looking into body image, which is how we think and feel about how we look, and to people's experiences of osteoporosis, to our experiences of aging and our relationship with our bodies. So that's what my research has explored for the past 20 years. What influences how we think and feel about our bodies, but also developing tools and strategies that we can use as individuals to help us have a more comfortable and accepting relationship with our bodies.
Thank you. Thanks for joining me. So I'm going to just start really setting the scene with a reminder to our audience about the physical changes that can sometimes occur with spinal fractures. Not for everyone, but we know for some people. So spinal compression fractures with osteoporosis. These are when the blocks of bone, the vertebra in our spinal column, squash down and become flattened or wedge-shaped. That's what happens with a fracture. They are stable fractures. They don't affect the spinal cord or cause paralysis, but when they heal, they do stay in this new, often what's called deformed shape. We'll come back to that word later. And if many bones are wedge-shaped, there's a permanent outward curve to the top part of the spine, and it can cause protruding tummy and other physical symptoms like breathlessness. So that's just to set the scene. Phillippa, perhaps you could just start by beginning to talk a bit about body image. What do we mean by body image, and why does it matter?
Yeah, sure. So as I said at the start, essentially what we mean by body image is how we think and feel about our bodies, which includes how they look, but also what our bodies can do. So this can mean like feeling unhappy about the way that we look, through to feeling pride about what our body allows us to do. And it can also include aspects to do with appearance, to do with illness or wellness. So how our body might cope with illness or how it's affected by illness and our perception of that. And body image is important because we know now from several decades of research that our body image can affect all key areas of our life. So it can affect our physical health, our mental health, as well as our relationships with other people, how we show up and do the things in different parts of our life or don't do them because of our body image. So, for example, we know that when people experience negative body image, which is sometimes called low body confidence, we know that they're more likely to experience anxiety and depression and stress. They might be more likely to have a challenging relationship with food and to over-exercise or under-exercise, for example. But also it can affect relationships and confidence. So it could affect how confident we feel to show up in social settings, to attend a party or something like that. Or, for example, in the workplace, for those who are working, how confident you feel to give an opinion or to lead a meeting. If you're feeling self-conscious about the way you look or your body, that's challenging. And through to moments of intimacy, our relationship with our body and how we're feeling will affect how we can experience pleasure in intimate moments, for example. So it has all of these key areas. On the other side, we know that when we have a positive relationship with our bodies, there are many benefits. And one thing that I think is important to clarify is when we talk about positive body image, or you might hear body acceptance or body confidence, that doesn't mean that you have to love every aspect of your body. What it really means is having a general sense of respect for your body, an acceptance for your body despite anything that you might perceive as an imperfection, and generally seeing your body as a positive influence on your life rather than a negative one.
Thank you. And that's something I think we're going to explore a bit more later. So it's a really helpful start. And going back to osteoporosis, we know that some people do feel very negative, as I said, understandably distressed by the changes that fractures can cause. And I thought I'd just illustrate that really with a couple of comments from our online community recently, where there was quite an in-depth discussion. One woman saying, my confidence has gone, I was very conscious of my posture, constantly trying to correct it and push my shoulders back, but feeling horrendously weak and ugly, which I think was an interesting comment. And also another woman saying, I found the way my body was evolving to be mentally crippling. So kind of really good illustration, I think, of what you're saying about the impact of these changes on body shape, body image. So Phillippa, tell us a bit more about the impact that physical changes can have on us, and perhaps what are the reasons for this? I'm thinking a bit about women, perhaps because we hear more from women, although obviously I'm sure men are affected too. Perhaps they're not so likely to express how they feel, but obviously there are these external pressures. Perhaps talk us through that.
Yeah. First of all, I think what I want to say is that particularly for women, but we also know that this is the case across genders, but women tend to be disproportionately affected by body image concerns. It's very normal across the lifespan to unfortunately experience some body image issues, whether or not you have a condition like osteoporosis. As we go throughout life, our bodies will naturally change through, growth during puberty, for example, through various life events. It may be pregnancy, it can be midlife, menopause, through to chronic health conditions and just general aging. Our bodies are living organisms and they're going to change their appearance. So it's very normal to be surprised or find periods of adjustment to how we look. And I think what's also really important to recognize that unfortunately, because we tend to in society and culture at the moment have very rigid and narrowly defined ideals of what is considered beautiful or attractive. And this is particularly the case for women. And this has been the case somewhat throughout history, but it kind of is at a peak right now due to the extent to which we can see all of these images in our day-to-day lives through media, social media, products and advertising, etc. Is that it's now considered more normal for women to be unhappy with their bodies than it is for them to have that body acceptance that I spoke about. And that's regardless of whether or not you have a condition like osteoporosis or a kyphotic spine. So is to rest assured you're not alone with this. This is something that is grappled with, but also to know that there are things that you can do to feel better about yourself. And it's interesting, I speak to this issue particularly from both a professional point of view and a personal point of view. So I actually had kyphosis and scoliosis when I was growing up as a teenager. And so very different experience perhaps to older adulthood, but had a very curved spine. And then I had major spinal fusion surgery to correct that curvature, which had some functional benefits as well, but then resulted in scarring. And that is part of it. Like our bodies, we have scarring, we have blemishes, but that's also part of our life experience. Of course, there are elements of this, though, how these conditions affect our relationship with our bodies in terms of pain or limiting functionality, and that's also part of body image, which I think it is important to recognize too.
Yes, and I think I was interested reading some of your research that we can't make assumptions. For some people it might seem as though it's how they look, but in fact it's as much about how they can't do what they used to be able to do, and how all those changes all sort of come together, don't they?
Absolutely. And I think you also can't assume what a person's body image is based on how they look. So, for example, two people might have curvature of the spine, but their experience of that and how they feel about themselves will be very different. Some people will really struggle with that, and it may affect their self-esteem and their body image, whereas for others, they may be fine with that, and it may be another part of their body that they're unhappy with, or maybe overall they have a general positive disposition to their bodies. And that's what's really interesting. We often assume that if someone looks different to a beauty ideal that we're told that we should aspire to, or has a distinctive appearance, that they must be really self-conscious. In fact, the research suggests that that's not the case. And there are many different conditions that can affect the way that we look. We're talking about osteoporosis, but for example, people may undergo treatment for cancer and their hair loss and the texture changes, through to scarring from an accident or injury, for example. Sometimes, our appearance, as I say, can change naturally as we age. So we may have hearing or vision aids, for example. So this is all, because sometimes I make this point because it can feel very isolating, and we can have a tendency to focus very much on how our appearance looks different to how it was. That will happen inevitably anyway with aging. This might be more severe or feel like that it's more distressing because it's away from the norm. But it is a part of human experience and life to have these differences and changes.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't this whole thing? I'd like to hear more of you about aging, because it's one of your particular research interests. But I've always thought there is this negativity that's linked closely with the effect of spinal fractures. So the hump, the deformed spine, those kind of stereotypes, I think, about the hunchback, kind of ugly, despised figure, or the old crone witch-like figure. And we do hear, particularly from women who suddenly find that their body's changing into one of these figures, these bad images that they're. So I think that's an interesting one. But perhaps talk a bit more about, because I think that, as you say, aging is a very clear experience that we all have to face when we are suddenly changing, aren't we?
I think it's interesting because, yes, I want to normalize aging. That's a normal part of life. I don't want to minimize, though, that it can be challenging because, like you just said, there are many cultural and societal pressures out there and systems and ideals in place that can make that challenging for some people, and particularly challenging for women because historically appearance has been something that women throughout history have been kind of valued for their appearance, and a lot of their kind of status in society has been almost judged based on how they conform to some ideals. And there are also lots of stereotypes we have in society about personal characteristics about someone based on how they look. So yeah, you gave the example of the hunchback, and if you look at even these ideas that we kind of get from a very early age, if you think about the fairy tales or the picture books or the cartoons that we might have grown up with, often they have caricatures, and the evil or the unusual people have quite exaggerated or distinctive figures, whether that's a hunched back or a really big nose or scarring, for example. And whilst that seems like benign and perhaps not impactful, that's just one of the messages that we're getting from a very early age about appearance. So of course, if we have appearance that makes us different from the norm, but also it kind of can feed into these stereotypes that we have about them. And then the other thing that we have coming at us is constant underlying pressure, but sometimes it's not a conscious pressure, but just an assumption that many of us have internalized that we should beautify ourselves or make our appearance look as best as it possibly can, how we present ourselves to the world. And that's an interesting one as we age as well, because there can be assumptions that as we age, we may not be as vital or cognitively with it, or, that we might be somehow limited in our capacities. And many people, as they age, they feel like, well, inside I feel like just me, my body looks different. And so we use our bodies as these external cues of aging. And at the same time, then we can feel, well, if I can just do all these things to my body to make myself appear younger, I will feel better about myself. And although that can happen sometimes, like we can do certain things that makes us feel better, often that's quite a short-term benefit, because in the longer term, that's not where we generate self-worth and joy. And appearance can be a form of self-expression through fashion, through makeup. We can express who we are and our personal style, as well as, our interests and things by playing with our appearance, which can be fun. But unfortunately, we live in a society that penalizes us if we do that in a certain way that doesn't conform to, for example, if I said to you, what does society tell us the perfect looking woman looks like? We will all immediately, quite quickly, be able to get an image in our head of what that looks like. Of course, that's just a social ideal and cultural ideal of beauty that's changed through different periods of history. It's different in different cultures now. But we have all taken all of these norms on board, and that can affect our relationships too with our bodies.
It's very interesting, and I think understanding that just helps us to kind of come to terms, to kind of grow with it, I hope. So let's move on to talk a bit about body positivity. Sorry to use that word. It's perhaps a bit of a jargon word. So perhaps you could explain a bit what we mean about body positivity. But just simply, is it possible to change the narrative? I mean, can we shift our perceptions away and feel more positive? What's your
absolutely. I think the thing about body image is it isn't fixed. So our body image can change and fluctuate throughout the day, and it can also fluctuate in different periods of our lives. And that can be context dependent, right? So if we're sitting at home, relaxing on the sofa, feeling very comfortable in our surrounds with familiar people or by ourselves, we might not be thinking about how we look as much compared to if we're going to an event and, everyone is kind of looking at what they're wearing. So our body image can fluctuate throughout the day, and it can also fluctuate through our lives, both in terms of getting worse and getting better. And I think the important thing to take away is that there are things that we can do to feel more accepting and respecting relationship with our body. Doesn't mean, the end goal isn't necessarily to say, oh, I need to get to the point that I love every aspect of my body. My body's changed and I have a curvature. I'm not saying that you have to get to the point where you're like, I love that. It's more that you can either have a neutral relationship to it. It doesn't affect your well-being or your self-view too much in the way that, say, the comments that you said from the women they shared it has. Or it might be an overall respect for your body. So, okay, I have these bodily changes and sometimes these functional limitations. It's not how my body looks, or it's not how I would like my body to look. But overall, I am grateful to my body for what it's allowed me to do throughout life, what it allows me to do now in my everyday life. And that's what we mean by positive body image. It's not necessarily what you hear about in the media. You don't have to be on a beach in a bikini loving every aspect of yourself. It's about your personal relationship with your body.
No, that's very helpful. And I've got a couple of quotes here which I picked up from our online community. One woman saying, I feel like my life's a little more in my control now. I can still travel, I can still enjoy it, just in a slightly different way. And another was commenting on a previous post saying, your motto, change what you can if you need to and accept the rest, is very powerful and compassionate to me. And it's great to read that you're doing that in your own time and in your own way. So I think that's kind of quite interesting. I guess it takes some time, doesn't it? Sometimes it's the shock of what's happening and then moving on, hopefully, from that.
Yeah, I think they're really lovely examples of practicing self-compassion. So acknowledging that this can be tough, but giving kindness to yourself and your body much in the same way that you would do to a friend. You think about sometimes the standards or the negative thoughts that we have about our bodies, and we can often be quite cruel, the things that we think about ourselves, and it can be so automatic because, we look in the mirror and we immediately have that thought. And there are things that we would never say to someone else. Well, I hope that we wouldn't, but most would never would. And it's how do we have that kind of general kindness to our bodies? But also, I think that first quote illustrates about there may be things that you're unhappy with in terms of what your body looks like or can do, but there will be many things that your body is doing on a daily basis. And even right now, as you know, someone is sitting and watching this, our bodies are digesting food, they're breathing for us, our skin is renewing, you know, our minds are letting us engage in this topic and have this conversation. My hands are allowing me to express myself. You know, it may be to create art, to write a letter to someone, to hug our loved ones. Our bodies are doing multiple things all the time, and focusing on that can be a really great way to heal your relationship with your body and to develop positive body image.
Thank you. It's a really positive message, and thank you for that. We haven't got a lot more time, which is such a shame because there's so much to talk about. But I just wonder if there's anything else that you'd like to, any tools, any other reflections that you'd like to bring, you'd like people to take away.
Yeah, I think if someone's interested in doing something immediately and exploring some of the topics that I've talked about, and they'd like to work on their body image, there's a really simple writing exercise that you can do, which encourages you to start thinking about the functions of your body. And it's a program called Expand Your Horizons, freely available online. You don't need anything more than a piece of paper and a pen. And I can give you the website address so you can put it in the notes for this webinar. And also just encourage you to have conversations with people, to do more reading, and to start perhaps thinking critically about a lot of the assumptions and beauty ideals that we've absorbed over time and how they've affected us, and think, do they really serve us anymore? And to try and find moments in your day where you focus on appreciating the things that your body allows you to do rather than just how it looks.
Thank you. That's great. Well, we've reached the end of the session. I hope it's raised and explored some, well, I know it's raised and explored some important issues about body image linked particularly to body changes with spinal fractures. Our aim has really been to acknowledge difficulties, but also hopefully set you on a path to thinking positively too. I'd just finally like to suggest you might want to go into the link below to our online community, because we do know that peer support is another helpful angle, and our online community can help with that. Again, another quote I picked out of it recently, which was in this thread, someone saying, "Thank you for giving me the boost I needed this morning," which was, I think, illustrating the importance of peer support. So if you would like to pick up on that, it's, as I say, a link in the description below. And just finally to say, we do have other bone matter series you might find, sessions you might find helpful. We had one on intimacy and another on emotional issues, which sort of are broader, looking at some other aspects. So all the links to those below. And finally, we would love to hear any reflections or feedback, so do feel that you can send those through as well. So all that's left is for me to say thank you very much, Phillippa. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and to you all for watching and listening.